In case you missed it, here's a Sports Animal Rewind.
Let's talk college football. It's time for the Sports Page Summer of College Football, presented by Buddy Gregg RVs and Motorhomes, our daily preview of teams and conferences around the country for the upcoming college football season. Find Buddy Gregg RVs and Motorhomes on their Facebook page, their website at buddygregg.com, and follow them on Twitter at Buddy Gregg RVs. Now let's take a look at the Missouri Tigers.
Joining us to preview the Missouri Tigers from the Kansas City Star, Terez Paylor joins us here on the News Sentinel Sports Page. Hey, Terez, Vince Ferrara in Knoxville. How you doing, Terez?
I'm doing great, Vince. Thanks for having me, man.
Well, my pleasure. I appreciate you doing it with us and sharing some of your insights. It's been a pretty interesting offseason for Missouri. There's been a number of players leaving the program for various reasons. If you could touch on this offseason for Missouri, including some of those players that have left the program.
Yeah, I've had a couple guys leaving. Offensive tackle Chris Freeman wasn't expected to play a whole lot, so that kind of makes sense. And in some cases, you get things like that where kids realize, you're just not going to play. I mean, Freeman's a guy who got passed up last year by a freshman who ended up getting hurt, and everybody knows the difficulty Missouri had on the offensive line last year because of injuries, and he still couldn't find a way to make his way onto the field. So in that sort of case, it really makes sense for a guy like that to go transfer and try and find somewhere to play.
Visiting with Terez Paylor from the Kansas City Star, covering the Missouri Tigers as we preview the 2013 football team in its second season in the Southeastern Conference. So, Terez, do you think that Missouri underestimated the quality of competition in the SEC, or maybe even the physicality?
I don't think so. I think Gary Pinkel's paid a whole lot of money to know what's coming. And the whole year, and the months come building up to last year, they spent that time, talking up the SEC about the challenge it would be trying to compete in that conference. Now, they were also confident that they would be able to do that. And there were a lot of people who thought that they would fare better than they did just because they had a returning quarterback, just because the offense had looked so good the year before. But you know what? The SEC is a different kind of deal, man. You saw that every week somebody could come up and beat you. Vanderbilt came here and won. Vanderbilt came to Columbia, that is, and won. So I think if there was any, and I doubt there was, but if there was any overconfidence, there certainly isn't now because the schedule is pretty tough, and there's pressure to win.
How much pressure is on Gary Pinkel? Give me a feels like temperature 0 to 100 on how warm his seat might be, if at all.
I think it's a little warm. I think it's sitting right at about 75. I think give or take a few. I think it's a situation where you better have a win this season and go to a bowl. It was still months away from any kind of decision like that being made, obviously, but. Mm-hmm. After going 5-7 and missing a bowl for the first time in 8 years, you got to show some improvement this year. That's for sure. So that's going to mean they need to go out to a 4-0 start. That's certainly possible. And then you got to win a couple SEC games. If you lose, if again if you fail to win at least 2 SEC games, which is how many they had last year, it's going to be hard for him to keep his job, I believe.
How big, in your opinion, were the injuries last year for Missouri?
I think they were really huge. I mean, at some point, Vince, 7 of their top 10 offensive linemen were hurt, or had been hurt at some point during the year. Okay, and they had a true freshman starting at left guard all year. Granted, the kid was a 4-star prospect, a really talented guy, but at the same time in the SEC, that's pretty rare. They had a former walk-on starting at right guard. They had both of their offensive tackles go down with knee injuries at various points. In the SEC, it's such an upfront league, so important to be able to establish the line of scrimmage. Missouri really struggled to do that and protect the quarterback. And though some of that had to do with the scheme, you can really look at the offensive line as a reason for that, too.
We'll talk about that offensive line this year.
I actually think they'll be better this year. I really do. You start at left tackle, which is the position that have to block Jadeveon Clowney and the rest of the premier defensive ends in this league. They moved Justin Britt over from right tackle to left tackle. Britt played all of 2011 at left tackle and was actually pretty good there. He's a guy that's coming off knee surgery, but he did participate in practice in the spring. He's looking pretty good. They moved the freshman that I just talked about, Evan Bain, the center, a sophomore. He's up to 315 pounds. They're pretty excited about the sense of physicality he can give them on the line. The walk-on I mentioned earlier, Max Copeland, he's back. He's going to be ready to start there at left guard or right guard. Then they have Connor McGovern, 6'5", 315, guy who came on strong in the spring. He'll play along with Mitch Hall, the transfer. And then at right tackle, Mitch Morris, a guy who shifted from center to right tackle. It was actually pretty decent out there, and he made the move out there last year because of the injuries. It was actually pretty decent. So I think this is a group that has some experience coming back. I know they'll be motivated after what happened last year. I think it'd be really interesting to see whether that experience and then a slight scheme change is going to help them.
Visiting with Terez Paylor, who covers the Missouri Tigers for the Kansas City Star here in our Sports Page Summer of College Football presented by Buddy Gregg RVs and Motorhomes. Elaborate, if you could, on that slight scheme change this year offensively.
Well, Missouri has a new offensive coordinator. Josh Henson, who spent the last few years as the co-offensive line coach, got the promotion after last year's offensive coordinator, David Yost, decided to step down. I think Henson's a guy who kind of knows who kind of got a chance to see what didn't go right for them last year, and because he sat in the box with Yost during games, and he's got his own opinion on how he's going to run this spread offense. And don't be mistaken. I mean, they're going to sit. They're still going to operate out of 4 wide. That's Missouri's spread offense. They're going to do that. But I do think you'll see less empty sets, and I also think that you'll see more of an attached tight end to the line. They'll try and get the tight ends more involved in the passing game. And also think it'd be rare that you see the quarterback lined up in the backfield without a running back next to him. All this is going to help them protect the quarterback and theoretically run the ball better.
Interesting. We're visiting with Terez Paylor from the Kansas City Star. We'll talk about that quarterback. So much was expected of James Franklin going into last year. Didn't have a good year, injuries, all kinds of different things. What do you expect from James Franklin in that quarterback position this year?
I think that's the biggest question going into the fall, man. Before spring practice, they opened up the quarterback competition. It didn't have a starter. They were going to make James earn it. And his competition was going to come from Corbin Bergstresser, who got a chance to play a little bit last year while he sat out, more than a little bit. And he struggled some, and he's a sophomore now. And the guy everybody wanted to see was redshirt freshman Matty Mauck, who set all kinds of prep records back at Ohio, redshirted last year. Wanted to see what this guy can do. They only opened up 3 practices for us to see. And in those 3 practices, Franklin looked like the better quarterback. So if he wins the job, it's going to be really important for him to have another year like 2011 when he had 36 combined touchdowns. This offense can't operate without a quarterback. And if Missouri wants to win, wants to go to a bowl this year, it's going to come down to James, I think, being the quarterback that he showed he was in 2011.
Another big plus is getting a terrific back in Henry Josie back from injury. How good do you expect Henry Josie to be, and how much will he help?
I'd say this much. Henson recently said that Josie is currently atop the depth chart. And when we saw him in the spring, he looked slippery. He didn't really seem affected by the injury. He didn't seem hesitant. He seemed like he was kind of getting back to his old self. Now, it remains to be seen. I mean, he's got to do it on the field. He's got to make it through camp in August. But if Henry Josie can return to what he was or close to what he was before, that gives the offense an entirely different dimension because then teams got to really worry about the running game, which is part of the reason Franklin was so good in 2011 because, teams had to pick their poison there. If you focus on Josie, Franklin could run through you. Or you focus on Franklin, Josie will run by you. So that's kind of the key there.
If Josie isn't his old self, what are the other options and how much of a drop-off is there after that?
Well, I really like Russell Hansbrough, who's a sophomore, got a chance to play a lot last year. Kid from Texas is really slippery, 5'9", 200, just low to the ground, really quick, very shifty. I think he's going to be a really good SEC running back before it's all said and done. So there's some options there. Marcus Murphy, who's an elite special teams player, kick returner, punt returner, he'll get some touches there. Greg White's a big back, 6'1", 215, but he's clearly behind the other three. So I think, at this point, there are some options there, particularly with Hansbrough, but if Josie is healthy and 100% back, he is the best option.
Dorial Green Beckham was once a few years ago, the number one overall prospect on many recruiting sites. How much pressure is on him to try to live up to the expectations that everyone had on him going in?
There's a lot of pressure on him. This guy is the number one prospect in the country, 6'6", 220, legit. He does measure out to that. Runs 4.5. The guy looks like he should be a dominant receiver. Of course, he gets to Missouri, a little rawer than people thought. And he wasn't necessarily used in a consistent manner. They tried to get him the ball, but they really tried to streamline things for him this spring. He's always lining up on one side of the ball. He's always lined up to the outside where he feels the most comfortable. They've really tried to make it sort of a repetition thing for him, make him more comfortable. And he showed some flashes in the spring, made a lot of plays in the practices we saw. So he could be a guy who's primed for a big year. But again, quarterback's got to get him the football.
Terez, let's hop over to the defensive side. That defensive line obviously having to replace Sheldon Richardson. Talk about the D-line group. Well,
Richardson's a guy, if you're a trench guy and you really enjoy watching line play, watching Sheldon Richardson was a joy last year. A really quick player, great off the ball, really a prototype 3 technique in Missouri's defense, which is a Tampa 2 type scheme that the Bucs used to run. He was really tailor-made for that defense. So you don't just replace that guy, but you do hope the other 3 guys on that line, who are Matt Hoke, defensive tackle, Coney Ely, and Michael Sam, step up their games a little bit and help you do so. Again, all those three guys were all starters last year. Coney Ely is a guy who's immensely gifted, 6'5", 275, runs well, naturally powerful. 3-star, 4-star prospect back a few years ago. This is a guy who has dreams of going to the league, found out that his draft grade, he's predicted to go in the 5th round, decided to come back. He wants to go to the league. I think he's going to have a big year. Michael Sam, on the other side, was probably the most productive defensive lineman in the spring. And then Matt Hoke really started showing some signs at the end of last year as the one technique. So, I think that line is potentially trending upward. It's really going to be important for whoever steps in for Richardson, whether it be Lucas Vincent or Harold Brantley, to prove themselves to be a capable player. And if they do, that line's got a chance to be pretty decent.
What about the linebackers? Looks like one starter back in that group?
Yeah, Andrew Wilson, actually the defensive MVP of the 2011 Independence Bowl. Hard-hitting guy. They moved him to inside linebacker after playing on the outside the last few years. They want him to be more vocal because he's a guy with the most experience there. It'd be interesting to see how that goes, but he's a pretty steady guy. You know what you're going to get from him. Physical player, about 6'3", 230. Does the things that you want the Tampa 2 middle linebacker to do. He's going to have to step up and be a vocal leader and presence for the defense. Alongside him, Darvin Ruiz, Donovan Bonner, he'll be flanked by those guys. And those guys actually had pretty good spring games last year, and they got a chance to play in the fall and were pretty decent, so it's going to be important for them to continue to trend upward in that way. If they do that, you can't replace a guy like Xavier Gooden, who got drafted in the 3rd round. It was a prototype weak side linebacker, but they got a chance to step in and at least do their jobs pretty good if they can.
What's your thoughts on the secondary?
I like E.J. Gaines. I think he's got a chance to be an all-SEC player. He needs to make more plays on the ball, get more interceptions, but he knocks down passes. He was a guy that was told he'd be a 4th-round pick in the draft, decided to come back. E.J. was one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12 2 years ago, and I thought he was pretty good last year. He stands to have a pretty good year. I think the safeties have to make more plays. Braylon Webb is back as a starter. Matt White played a little bit last year, played some the year before. Just in general, those guys have to make more plays. It'll be interesting to see what happens on the other side of games, though. Randy Ponder comes back as a starter. but I think he's going to get pushed. He's been pushed in the spring by sophomore David Johnson and redshirt freshman John Gibson. Both those guys are fast, and they have a lot of natural ability, though they're short on experience. So if those guys can continue to develop, they got a chance to start opposite games. And
just a quick thought on special teams.
Yeah, Marcus Murphy's one of the best returners in the country. Mm-hmm. Took back the kick against Alabama. I don't think it's out of question to expect him to have another great year returning the ball. I think the kicking situation, Andrew Baggett's back, going to be important for him to improve, become a little bit more consistent on extra points. He missed a few last year. It's definitely not something you want. And it seemed like we were always asking about special teams last year, whether it be a missed block or a screwed up hold or a mixed extra point, and it cost them in some games. And as we saw in the SEC, like it doesn't take much to contribute to a loss. You know what I mean? You don't need that much. So you gotta take care of the simple things. And I think it's going to be important for them to really tighten up things on special teams in general this year.
Terez, last thing with you. We appreciate your time. You mentioned the possibility early on to start 4-0 with the non-conference games, and then you get into conference play. Talk about the schedule and your realistic expectation in terms of wins for Missouri this year.
Yeah, I think like the first couple games, you can reasonably expect them to win. I know Indiana's not a great program by any means, but they got to go on the road and play those guys at night. So if there are any cracks in this team's armor, I think that will show in that game. That's a game they should win on the road at Indiana, but it's not a gimme. And then there's a pretty tough stretch of games against the SEC schedule in November. At the end of the day, you got to start 4-0. You got to take care of business in the non-conference. Then I think Missouri's path to going to a bowl basically starts with doing that, and then winning at Vanderbilt, at Kentucky, and then trying to steal another one somewhere. Now, that'll put you at 7-5, and that's pretty decent. You'll take that, especially if you're Missouri, still trying to prove yourself in this conference.
So you're referring to at Georgia, home to Florida, home to South Carolina. I mean, those are
that's a tough stretch. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. I mean, that's a tough stretch. That's what I'm saying. I mean, you're going to need to take care of business at Kentucky, at Vanderbilt. And, Vanderbilt's far from an easy win these days, you know what I mean? Yeah. So if you can do that and then steal one somewhere else, that puts you 7-5. Of course, you only got to go 4-0 in the non-conference and beat Vanderbilt and Kentucky to go 6-6, and that'll put you in a bowl. Reasonably, I'm gonna predict them to go 6-6 and probably go to a bowl game. That's I feel pretty comfortable saying that right now, but it doesn't take much for that to go 1 or 2 games either way.
Terez, we really appreciate it. Tell people where they can find your work on the Missouri Tigers this year online and Twitter and all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, please go to kansascity.com, find the latest on our coverage of Missouri Tiger sports, and you can find me on Twitter at Terez, Terez, Paylor, Paylor.
Very good. Terez, really appreciate it. You going to be down at SEC Football Media Days here in a couple weeks?
I will. I definitely will, man. I'll definitely see you there.
All right, looking forward to it. Thanks, Terez.
Okay, thank you.
That is Terez Paylor, covers the Missouri Tigers for the Kansas City Star with our football preview of the Missouri Tigers in 2013. More of the Sports Page Summer of College Football. More talk on Missouri next. New Sentinel Sports Page brought to you by Image Matters on the Sports Animal.